Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hot Seat with Cognizant Clay. I am your host, Clayton Terrio. Before I get to today's guest, I just want to announce my new sponsor. I am officially sponsored by Retrokat Gaming. They sell gaming consoles with retro games on them, and they are all handheld. Head over to retrokat.ca, that's retrokat.ca, and check out their shop. If you use the code Cognizant Clay in all caps, you get 15% off your purchase. Today on the show, we have Dominique Cheshire. Dominique is a good friend of mine. She is a Barre, Pilates and Yoga instructor. She has an acquired brain injury from a fall back a few years ago. And it was a great interview, and she is very fun to talk to. She also has her own podcast called the Embodied Alchemy Pod. Go check it out. Hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you for doing this, Dom. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to talk to you.
Yes.
So how are you doing? How has everything been during all this crazy COVID craziness?
I mean, I feel like it really is a week to week situation. Like, I feel like if I had answered that question in April or May, my answer would have been a little bit sadder, maybe. Whereas now I still feel overwhelmed, as I'm sure we all do. And I still feel a little like, well, on the beginning end of this, we were heading into summer. So that was like light at the end of the tunnel, whereas now we're heading into winter. So I'm kind of nervous about that, but I mean, it's like freaking gorgeous right now. So I'm hoping that this like spring and November gravy train keeps running.
I hope so. Me too. And
Yeah.
it has been a little sketchy. I mean, especially being disabled myself, it's like, oh God, I don't want COVID. Like, please no. So
Yes.
we've been lucky. There's been no cases in the building, even though there's like 15
Amazing.
different PSWs that work here. So we're
Oh,
lucky.
sorry. I didn't even think about that. Like, do they have to sort of like change their stuff every time they go to a new person?
Yeah, they got to like change their gloves, wash their hands
Yeah.
every time they enter. They have to wear a mask, obviously.
Obviously,
And
yeah.
we're all on a schedule. So they switch. They usually leave just before the other workers cover them because they can't all be crowded together because that would be
Right.
breaking social distancing. So we have that. Well, so to start off, I'm going to touch on the disability that you acquired, which is a little bit of a crazy story, but
It is.
so you were at a friend's apartment and the balcony collapsed and you fell off, which is blows my mind that you even survived that.
I know.
Um, so you split your forehead open to the bone, you had a broken nose, shattered foot, impact injuries, and obviously an acquired brain injury, which is understandable falling from that height.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously PTSD came from that. So to start off, how did you overcome that injury?
You know, it's so interesting. Like, I was obviously like mentally preparing to be chatting with you today, and I'm just excited to chat with you anyway. And I was thinking about that you would likely ask me that, and I still feel like I don't know. And I also like even hearing you say, like you acquired a disability from that, like I've never like seen that in myself or thought about that in myself. And I don't know if that's become because like I come from a very British family where we just make fun of each other all the time. So like these funky quirks that I have and that I do now just sort of like they've amalgamated into my personality. So it's hard to I sort of can't remember what like I was like before and what I'm like now. But I think part of it is that and I do not recommend this for anybody, is I just sort of like didn't engage with how serious it was. Like I think that's part of PTSD anyway, is that like I couldn't really process exactly what had happened to me, exactly what was going to continue happening for me, what the projection of my life was going to be. And I mean, I still look back and I still have moments where I'm like, I have to remind myself, like, not that I can't do something, but I need to approach with care with certain things just because like I have to consider these parts of me now. which I don't know if that's really answering your question, but I think that was it. Like, I set these goals that were like absolutely not, they were not going to happen. Like, they definitely were not something that I actually could do, but I had to believe that I could. And then in the process, even though I couldn't complete that goal, in the process of like preparing to complete that goal, I sort of like kept moving forward.
Yeah, that answers it. I think that's how a lot of people do that. You just got to keep moving. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It takes how long it takes. And what were some of the challenges that you were presented with after the injury?
Well, because this happened on someone's property, I was then in a lawsuit, which wrapped up fairly quickly in 3 years. It could have gone on. It was 3 years, which is quick for what it was. And it was mostly able to do that because it was like fairly black and white. It could have gone on for a lot longer. But that presented a huge challenge that I don't actually think gets talked about a lot. Like, when you're the person on the receiving end, like, I mean, I kind of forget all of the legal jargon, but like, I was the one who was suing them, obviously, for damages to myself. And I had a massive medical bill credit card that needed to get paid off, and a life that I needed to continue living with support. So I had a lot of PTSD that came specifically from that. So like, not just my accident, but then also being in a lawsuit. And that was something I was like super not prepared for, and a challenge that was really hard to talk about, because when you're in a lawsuit, like, you kind of aren't allowed to talk about things. So that was one of them. Definitely the experience of like, I mean, I feel like maybe I can share this story if you're cool with it. Like, I remember I'd maybe been home for like 3 days or something. So I'd been living in Toronto when this all happened. And I went directly like from the accident site to the hospital, from the hospital to my family home in Oakville. So I had like no clothes, nothing with me at all. And my mom was trying to like keep me in spirits. So I was in a wheelchair at the time because my leg had been broken. And so she took me to Oakville Place, and you happened to be there that day.
Remember that?
I know, we have a picture too. And I like, every now and then it pops up somewhere on like my memories and Facebook. And I'm like, oh my God, poor Clayton. Like, people were looking at me funny that whole day, and I couldn't understand why. And now I look back on that picture, because I think you were one of the first people that saw me post. And I'm like, oh God. So yeah, so like, having that experience of being a person who needed assistance, like my mom would be like, because I had damage to my hands as well. So like, I couldn't wheel myself, and also like being on crutches was really, really painful. So just mobility in general was like tough for a little while. But my mom would constantly be like wheeling me somewhere and then get distracted and like let go, like thinking that I would stop. But I'm like, it doesn't work that way. And I think the emotional component of it too, right? That emotional, mental, I had been a full-time athlete, and to go from that to then literally not being able to really do anything by myself. I couldn't bathe by myself. I needed help for everything, basically. Like, I mean, I maybe had a second of privacy when I needed to go to the washroom, but that was like because I demanded it, and I would like scoot on my bum and then do whatever I needed to do and then leave. And I also, I mean, I don't know how comfortable you are with this, but like, also as a person, and I'm seeing a lot more of this now, like as a person who needs assistance, like as a menstruating person, like that's a whole other conversation as well. And so, yeah, suddenly I was exposed to this world where I was like, I've never had the opportunity to approach life through this lens. And now it's become like very pertinent in my quality of life.
And it is funny. That's good. I like long answers. They're better. I don't like short answers. But I think that's kind of like almost a sign that you saw me, out of all people, one of the first people, like a disabled person that lives it every day, and like getting stared at and asking what the hell's wrong with you, and like just rude things that people don't think are rude, and they come out so just brash. And it's like, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, to show people like we're normal, where there's nothing wrong with us. Just because we look different doesn't mean we are different. And it's there's so many things that are hard being disabled, but I don't know, it's my life. I've lived it for several years, so I just keep going and whatever. At first though, I'm sure you can relate to this, the help is hard. Like, it's called internalized ableism, where you think that you're a burden to other people. But after, I'd say 3 or 4 years of that as a pretty much, I think I was 13 when I stopped walking. It was hard to ask for help, but then once a few years go by, it's like, whatever. I mean, it's not going to happen if I don't ask for help. So you got to do it. And who are some of the people that helped you stay positive during that?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I could get very emotional about that because I think that no matter what it is you're going through, like it could be any tough thing, like having people around you that are there to pick you up when you're down is like, it's a game changer. So I was really lucky that my family was able to bring me back into the house, and bless my poor sister who I'm obsessed with. She pretty much gave up, like, well, I don't want to say gave up. She took care of me a lot. My room in the family home is in the basement and her room is upstairs. And I mean, I couldn't get up and downstairs. I couldn't be I couldn't be isolated. So like she switched rooms with me, and she has a much nicer, bigger room than I do. So I know that she was happy to do it. But my family was amazing. For the first little while, like, even though I wasn't, like all there really, and my awake hours were very limited. I needed like a lot of rest. I would still have friends that would come over. And part of my PTSD was like, I was like bandaged up, and my leg was in a cast and I couldn't get comfortable and all those things. But I would have really, really bad nightmares and night terrors about falling. And then your body's reaction, or my body's reaction to that, would then be like to twitch, to react, which then would cause a whole other cycle because then my whole body's bruised and broken. And then it was just like a continuous thing. So like I had friends that would come over and just hold my hand while I was sleeping. And like, that is something that makes me feel very emotional. So like that kind of support is it's those things, it doesn't have to be a big gesture. I mean, people brought me food and would come and read books with me, to me, because I can really read myself. But just like checking in and telling me about their day and not asking me about mine was like huge. So yeah, I had like a very, very good support system.
I definitely agree with that. A lot of my friends, like, if I'm having a bad day, I just ask what they're up to, and it helps. It does, because it kind of distracts you from all the, pardon the French, but all the bullshit that goes on a daily basis. Like, there's so many things that people don't understand being able-bodied, and then once you're just put in that situation randomly, it's like, I couldn't imagine, because being born with it is different. It's all I've known, but being able-bodied and then it just, the snap of a finger being taken away, even for a short time, is just, that's heavy. Like, I know a lot of paralyzed people that were AAA athletes about to go pro, and then they had an injury and it was over. It's my best friend, John. He was a pitcher in baseball and a basketball player, and he had the choice to go pro in either one, and he broke his neck, and that was it. It was over. And he is the most zen person I know. He is always calm. He never panics or anything. And I think he's been a big influence on a lot of people, which is good. So I'm going to touch on your backstory before the injury, because, and I know it's probably not the greatest thing to talk about, but I know you're an open book. So before the injury, you were an avid dancer. It was basically your life. And just to start out, can you talk me through kind of discovering dance and what the journey was into that?
I literally cannot remember a time when I wasn't, other than right now, like wasn't dancing. The joke is that I just like came out of the womb and that was just like who I was, which I feel like makes sense. So I think I started like in Oakville and like as a little kid rec dancer person, and I was just always dancing around. And my parents were always really like, if she ever said she hates this, we're not going to make her do it. But every kind of like time it was a new year and I was a year older, they would always check in, and every teacher I ever had said like, as long as she's happy being here, like keep her here. And then so it just sort of evolves. And the dance world can be, I don't like to speak negatively of it because it was like my whole life, but I will say that it can be such a hurricane of a place, and there are like so many different avenues, and especially as you get like further and further and further along, it can become like any sport, right? Like more and more, and there's always politics involved and all those things. And so I ended up sort of being in the avenue of ballet. That was like my very specific thing that I liked to do. So I wasn't really trained in anything else. And what I was doing in ballet was like very much sort of copy paste. Like you're given the choreography, you're given, there's like exams you have to do, you're given all of the work for the exams, and then you spend whatever your time frame is leading up to that thing perfecting it. So if it's like, I mean, Nutcracker every year, or like a performance you have to learn, or an exam you have to prepare for, you have your set amount of time. And there's not as much space in the learning environment that I was in. There wasn't as much space for like creative voice. And so I didn't really develop that. I mean, I don't even know. I think I'm still learning how to develop it, to be honest, but that whole thing was kind of foreign to me. And then when I was 16, the cycle always comes around. I had been dancing so much that my body just sort of like shut down. And so from 16 to 18, I wasn't dancing, and I was like a little bit lost. And I was like, well, I don't know what my creative voice is, because I didn't know it there, and I don't know where it is now either. And then it was through there that I ended up getting into contemporary, which again was a whole other thing where I was like, oh my God, all they're doing all the time is creating and exploring and expressing. And I don't know how to do that, but I want to learn. And that was how I ended up then studying post-secondary dance. That we still had our ballet classes because technique is sort of everywhere, but I ended up getting into contemporary, which is like a whole other kettle of fish of stuff.
Yeah, totally different. And I want to touch on your little hiatus that you did. You actually went to Bogota, Colombia, which is such a beautiful place, but very different. I remember saying you dyed your hair dark because a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman going there isn't really a common sight in that part of the world.
And I will put like a little asterisk there and say that that was fully like for my parents' comfort and safety.
Yeah.
I've just put that asterisk there because I feel like at the end of the day, like I'm very not a tanned human being. And so I would stand out anyway. But yeah.
It's very true. It's very true. And so you actually went to get away from dance, but when you were there, you were approached to teach classes to kids. And that's just crazy how you're getting away from it and then you get asked to do it. So what was that like? Like, what was the experience like, and what did you learn on that trip?
Oh my God, that was like one of the most incredible things I've ever done in my life. And it was very, very random. I just decided, so at 16, I couldn't dance anymore. And my whole life had been leading up to a career in dance. And I'd always done very well in English. I mean, we both have this in common with journalism school. And we were both like, I don't know if I love this. So I had applied for journalism. I'd gotten in. And while everyone around me was like, I'm so excited about university, I was like, I need to just go away for a little while. And so I initially had picked Ghana, and my parents were like, nope. And I was like, okay. So then I was like, well, I'm going to go to Bogota. And my dad was like, that's not better. But I was like, well, I'm going. So this is where I'm going. And it was through a third party. I can't remember what they're called. If I remember, or I'll look it up after, I'll send you that information if you want it. But basically what they do is they're like a third party connector. So instead of going with like a huge organization, they connect you to local organizations so that you can be a little more like connected to what they need. I'll also do a little aside here and say that like 10 years later, because this would have been 10 years ago now, 10 years later, like my feelings about volunteering and volunteerism and that kind of stuff are much different. But at 18 at the time, it was like what I felt like I needed to do. And those lessons are what brought me to this feeling of like, maybe that's not a good thing. But anyway, and so when I was there, because I was going to be there for like a fairly longish amount of time, like a lot of people just go for like a week or two. I was supposed to be there for 3 months and I had to cut it short because I got sick. So I was there for 2 months. And the school that they put us in, and I use the term school like loosely, it was pretty much just like a building. And part of the project that people had was like building this building so it could support schools. But 2 volunteers who had been there before me had created like a little arts room. And it was like actually quite, considering like the circumstances, like really, really well put together. And I don't know where they got the resources, but I'm grateful for them for it. And as I got to know the community that I was in, they asked, and they got to know me, they asked, oh, would you teach a dance class? And my Spanish at the time was like non-existent. I didn't have any Spanish. So there happened to be another girl who was also Canadian arriving not long after me. And her Spanish was really good. And she was a dancer. So she was so graceful and amazing. And she was like, this is your project. I'm just here to help. And I was like, that's amazing. Cause really you should be running this program. You speak the language and I don't. But it was amazing. Like we had kids who like their joy just comes from being alive, really. Like their joy comes from, I mean, and I think kids are like that anyway, but especially here, it's so different. And so what we did was we put like age groups together, and then within those age groups, it became very clear that there was a lot of like amongst them racial issues and bullying issues, and I just made it very clear that like that's not what we're here for at all. And so we happened to time it so that the last day was International Dance Day, which was like some nice juju to finish off with. And so we created these routines for them. And what that did was it brought a little bit of more structure into their day. But then we started to see this like very kind reaction of the kids that were struggling and had maybe been like getting bullied, starting to like build relationships with their peers in a really positive way from the understanding that I have. And it grew into this really beautiful thing where then we had this presentation on Dance Day, and all these kids had worked together to create what they had created. And one girl who'd been getting bullied like pretty severely up until that point had loved the process. And I don't know there was a whole bunch of different things going on, and no one really knew her official diagnosis for stuff, but she definitely wasn't like cognitively there the same way as her peers. And anyway, so she ended up making a comment as to my project manager person, and she just made a comment about like me and how when she grows up she wants to be like this, and I like lost it. So I was like, I have learned so much more. I'm nobody. Like I'm just some white girl who very ignorantly flew into this country without knowing your language, and like trust me, like you're gonna be bigger and better and brighter than anyone. So yeah, and that's why I ended up going back to dance, was because it's re-sparked my joy for it too.
Yeah, and that's amazing when a child basically idolizes you. It's like, whoa, like me, what's so special about me? But it's
yeah,
kids are just the best, like honestly, especially in those countries, like no opportunity like we have, and they're just all so happy, and we're all complaining that our Starbucks drink tastes like shit, or our gym closed because of COVID, and it's like, well, these people don't have these things and they never complain, and it blows me away. So after that you went back into the post-secondary dance program in Toronto, which you were excelling at until the injury, unfortunately, which effectively ended your dance because you shattered your foot, and just all the brain injury, everything all swirled up into one amazing concoction, he said sarcastically. So how did you overcome not being able to dance anymore?
That was really hard. So I will say that by the time, so this accident happened in between my second and my third year. It was in the summer.
Yeah.
And my first year and half of my second year had been a huge, huge struggle. In my first year, I'm trying to remember the timeline of this, but in my first year, just before that was my second year, never mind. I struggled with my health a lot in my first and second year for various reasons, a lot having to do with having traveled and picked up parasites and all kinds of different stuff. And when you're in a very, very physically involved program, like that was really tough. And so despite all that, I still was invited. You get invited back every semester or every term, and there's 3 terms in a year. So you have to be invited back every term. So despite all of my difficulties, I kept being invited back, which was like, whew, good to go, because they easily could have said no. And I missed a lot of classes too, because I was just not well. And then in my second year around Christmas, a mentor of mine who I'd known since I was like 10. So at this point, I've known her for like 11 years, died really, really suddenly. And I was supposed to see her the day I had found out she had died on a Saturday after a show. And I was supposed to be going home that Sunday morning to see her. And I had a friend messaged me and asked me what had happened. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm going to see her tomorrow. And she was like, oh, you don't know, kind of a deal. And that was really tough because I knew her through the dance world. And so when I had to go back to school after that, I really struggled. Like every time I was in a class and every time I would hear like certain kinds of music, I just like would break down. So it was a struggle to make it to the end of my second year. But I did. But I finished I was really excited about going into my third year and feeling really, really motivated. And that was when I say that to get through the recovery process, I sort of had this goal that was like nowhere near going to happen, that my goal was to go back to school. And so I had this very intense, like, so what I had on my left foot is called a Lisfranc fracture. And it basically means that you have multiple fractures, but none of them puncture through. And usually what happens when people have this kind of sustain this kind of injury is that they get hardware put into their foot, and then that's kind of it. They're very lucky if they get like 70% mobility back in their foot, and that hardware is usually in there for life. And when they were telling me this, I was like, well, I'm a dancer, so I'm definitely going to get 100% mobility back, which I pretty much have. Like now my mobility, most people would have no idea, except for all the scarring, would have no idea. And so I just sort of refused to accept, which brought me a lot of grief and upset, but I refused to accept that I wouldn't be able to dance again and I wouldn't be able to go back to school. And I kept thinking like, okay, well, I'll make it for next semester, or I'll make it for next semester, knowing full well, like it took me 2 years to be able to walk properly again. Like there's no way I'm going back to dance school. Plus with my head, I can't like throw my head around in space really anymore, which is contemporary is like all over the place. But yeah, I just sort of refused to accept it, which sometimes made me really sad, but that was just how I got through it. I was very stubborn. I was like, well, no one's going to tell me what I can't do, so I'm just going to get better.
Right. And but look how far you've come since then.
Yeah.
And that leads to the next chapter, which is a very similar, it definitely involves movement, but it's not quite as intensive. And that's, so you are an instructor for Barre, Pilates, and Yoga, right? It's the three. Okay.
It's the three,
so how did you get into those three disciplines?
Wow, that is a great question. Yoga, I always did anyway. Yoga was often, I have a lot of opinions about things, so please let me warn me to rein it in if I'm like going totally off. But at the time when I was dancing, yoga was often suggested as like something we do supplementary for reasons that like now is on this end of things. I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. But that was something I always was kind of doing anyway, just outside of dance. I liked that for the most part, the classes I was taking were structured. I liked that there was a rhythm. I liked that there was music. I liked that there was peaks and valleys the same way there is in dance. And I liked that it was physical and mental. So I sort of already was doing yoga, and I actually always thought that somewhere down the line I would become a yoga instructor, because for a lot of dancers, like professional dancers, you kind of need jobs that are quite flexible in the interim of projects, and you can't really work a 9 to 5. So you also need something that's going to like pay you more than minimum wage for the few hours you are doing that job. So that was something I'd always had in my back pocket anyway. And then Pilates, one of my best friends now, we met at school and we were roommates, and then she's also from this area, and when we were living together she was doing her Pilates training, which is like kind of hilarious because there's a very specific breath, so every now and then I'd be like, you good in there, like what's happening, as she was training. And so she said to me, because I was very limited with what I could and couldn't do, especially at the very beginning, but I just again had this very unrealistic goal that I was going to get better and go to school. And so she was like, well, you can probably do reformer Pilates, because for anyone who doesn't know, a reformer is a machine, and essentially it uses different pulley systems as a way to support your body or challenge your body, whatever it is you need to do. And it's almost no impact. So I was like, okay, this sounds reasonable. And I was hooked. It was not just my physical space. I think for my mental health, it was really good as well to be in this room of people that nobody was telling me I couldn't do something, because I was literally there to do something. And nobody treated me differently. We just chatted. And there were days where, especially like in the thick of lawsuit stuff, I would go and I would maybe like be moving and cry in a corner because the issues are in our tissue. So like sometimes we move and then we cry and it's cool. And I was asked eventually, when I was starting to get to a point where I was like, okay, I'm ready to consider working again, but what are my options? I can't be on my feet for very long. I also can't sit down for very long. I don't have a fantastic memory. It's much better now. I've done like brain rehabilitation programs, but at the time I hadn't. So I was like, I'm not very great with my memory. I can't work very much. So I've just felt like very, very limited. And it was the owner of that studio who approached me and asked if I'd want to teach. And so I was like, well, I don't have any other options and I love this. So yeah, sure. So that's why I ended up with a Barre training, was because she had said, let's do this one first. It's a much less of an investment, and it's also reduced hours. So I started with that and it went really well. And then I did my Pilates, and then it just sort of spiraled from there, because I was very fortunate that where I was teaching was in a rehabilitation adjournment program. So people would go to their physio, they would get all their diagnosing, and then they would come to us for the movement rehab. And I was like, I understand this. I just have been doing and continuing to do Pilates as my movement rehab. So it was cool, because when people were coming in with these feelings of like hopelessness or pain and wanted to move, I was like, I can say I understand what you're going through, and I honestly understand to the best of my ability what you're going through. And I have been doing that for 5 or 6 years now. Yeah.
I think empathy is the main thing as well. Like, anybody can have sympathy for somebody else, but empathy is tenfold more powerful, in my opinion, because you can relate to that person. And that's definitely interesting that it was your rehab and that's how you started doing it. Like, a lot of people think, oh, my love of life is over. What's the point? But it's like, well, there's always something else. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. And it completely, I know you have lots of questions and stuff, but it also, like, as a teacher, or I don't even love using that word sometimes, as a leader, as a facilitator in that space, I think that sometimes our role can get glamorized as if we're these people that can do all the things we're telling you to do. And the objective is to like look a certain way. And for me, like, I recognize now that most people looking at me would have no idea. Like, I definitely do still have weird days where the only word I can say is orange, and I can't tell you why. It's just like the only word that comes out of my mouth. But for the most part, nobody would know. And so I think it's important, and I am doing my best that I can right now to bring awareness to the fact that, like, we need more representation in these leadership roles in a multitude of different ways, but also to recognize that, like, it's not about being the strongest or the leanest or the whatever. I mean, if you have those goals, cool and great, but like, if you're a person who just like can get 10 minutes of movement in your day and you've been in pain for the rest of the other 24 hours and 50 minutes, if that math is right, of the day, like, that's a huge accomplishment. And like, it's not little and it's not small and it's not insignificant. Like, that is just as huge as whatever the goal is that we seem to see showing up all the time.
Definitely. And the one thing I can think of is there is wheelchair yoga. So even people that are almost completely immobile, it's almost like meditation at that point. And I've started attempting meditation and it works. Like, just turning your brain off for even 10 minutes is so powerful. And it's really interesting to me, that whole thing. So what is your favorite part of the job? I had to ask that because there's probably so many different aspects.
There are. I think my favorite part is that I just love that moment. Maybe this is probably very conceited, but I really love that moment when someone comes in, and it happens almost daily, where someone comes in and they tell me, like, this is what my day has been. And you can tell that their energy is like, just showing up was like the biggest thing they could have done. And then they leave and it's like that day didn't even matter, you know? And like, so for that hour that they were there, nothing else in the world existed, and it got to be about them. And I mean, I have a lot of male clients as well. I didn't mean to emphasize it like that. I just think that people don't expect that. Yeah. I'm like, I have a lot of male clients. There's a lot of male clients in Pilates and in the yoga world as well, but I work predominantly with women. And I have had, now after being a teacher for so long, now women come back to me and be like, I just need to let you know that, like, from knowing you and for that 1 hour, this is how my life changed. And it's not about me. Like, I just happened to be the person that was there that day. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really think it's me, but just that whole thing, that's my favorite part, is it literally, if you empower people in the time that you have them there, like, that empowerment can trickle everywhere in their life.
Absolutely. I don't think that's conceited at all, because that's happy for other people. It's not, like you say, it's not just you, it's the process involved. And a lot of males do it. Like, most of the athletes, hockey players, soccer, you name it, do yoga, Pilates, just to turn off after a game or prepare for a game because you have to save your energy. And not only is it exerting it, but you can save it as well, which I think is cool. It can go both ways, really.
100.
So I have a segment I do with all my guests called Rapid Fire. I just ask random questions. Well, to start off, because you have an English background, I'm going to ask this in two ways because you are English as well. So first of all, who is your favorite person from England?
Oh my God. My favorite English person?
Can be anybody.
I honestly don't know. Okay, so I grew up watching a lot of British comedy, and she's maybe not as like conventional, but I really love Catherine Tate. She's like really, really hilarious. If anyone has watched her, I love her a lot. I think that she might be my favorite person because this is rapid fire and I'm going to leave it at that.
No, it's fine. And second one, who is your favorite Canadian?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I think right now I have to say there's so many favorite Canadians I have, but I really, really love Tessa Virtue. I was very Tessa Virtue, Scott Moyer, and like still like soak up all of the content I can with them. And I really love her too.
Yeah, and she's dating Morgan Riley on the Leafs, so
I know.
And I love her and Scott Moyer. They're so great.
They're so great. There's also I just learned recently about this girl, and if I knew you were going to ask me that question, I would have written her name down, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But she's basically like the Greta of Canada, and she's Indigenous, and she's like 10, and she's won all these awards for environmental climate change. And I'm like learning more about her, and she's quickly becoming a favorite Canadian also.
I know who you're talking about. I can't think of the name either. I'm terrible with names. So.
Brain trauma. I'm like not great with some things.
Memory gone. It's hard on the spot. What is your favorite thing to eat?
Okay, I really love like a really good vegan mac and cheese, but it has to be not like super nut based. I like it when it's more like vegetable based. Oh, you know what? Now I'm thinking about it. There's this restaurant in Toronto called Love, Lov, and they do this like Brussels sprout thing, and you can get like the side of Brussels sprouts and then the mac and cheese, and you put them together, and I think it's my favorite thing in the whole world.
Well, and veganism is really on the rise, and I'm not, but like I think it's so fascinating. One of my favorite athletes, Lewis Hamilton, the F1 driver, is completely vegan, and he's just like it's definitely interesting. I want to try vegan cuisine to see what it's like because
we'll have a date when we do it.
My sister really likes it. So
is your sister vegan?
No, but she doesn't eat a lot of meat. She's more vegetable and like vegan based.
Cool.
Like she has milk products too, but she's very, very healthy eater. So a lot of vegan dishes come up. So, and this one, I know one of them, but I'm going to go top three. Your top three favorite bands or musicians.
Okay, well, Foo Fighters, obvi. I think we both knew that was coming. Spice Girls.
Yeah, I knew that.
Okay, top three. Foo Fighters, Spice Girls, and a third one is really, really, really hard. Okay, well, through COVID, I was listening to a lot of Hozier because I'm just obsessed with him. Kind of would like him to be my boyfriend. I'm sure my current boyfriend is okay with that. I also, I went through a huge like Weezer phase in my life. I also really love Weezer. It's like quite a variety. Okay, can I say that? It's like 1, 2, and then a 0.5 and a 0.5. Like
yeah, that's
Weezer.
If you were to ask me a top three, it would be 0.3% for each one, and I'd say 9. So
yeah, I know.
And like Weezer, it's funny. Stupid COVID. I was supposed to go to Weezer Fall Out Boy Green Day show at Rogers Center, and then COVID hit, and it was like, no, we're postponing it. I was so sad because Fall Out Boy was like my emo preteen phase, and then Weezer and Green Day were like the stoner teenager phase. So
I always remember you loving Green Day.
Green Day. Yeah, I've seen them 6 times. Like they're just so good, and Billy Joe is crazy. Like when he's on stage, I could watch him all day. It's pretty funny. And last question, and this one's always hard for people. I feel like this is the one that stumps people the most. Steve and Shelley's getting involved. If you could be anybody, living or dead, for 24 hours, who would you choose? It's
Okay.
always a hard one.
It is a hard one. I'm just trying to think rapid fire and like be okay with my answer. I think I would really like to be Hans Zimmer for 24 hours because I would just love to know how his brain works for all the composing that he does.
Yeah, and so many different movie soundtracks are him. Like
Yeah.
he's just, yeah, definitely fascinating. So back into the questions. We're done with rapid fire out of the woods there. So this one I wanted to ask too because we're going to record your episode after. So you're also a podcast host like myself, and it is called the Embodied Alchemy Pod. If anybody wants to listen, highly recommend. It's very positive and very upbeat. Why did you decide to start that?
I decided to start it because I think I was at, the details of it are kind of hazy. But I think what I can remember to the best of my ability is that I was at an event and we had to do like an exercise or something like that. And you were like, somehow I got thinking about like how grateful I was for knowing a bunch of really cool people. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, like when people hear about my story, they ask me about how I did it. And I know all these other people that have the same answer that are like, I don't know, I just did. And as I was opening myself up to that, I started to like really learn about these people that I'd known in my life, but maybe didn't know these layers of them, really start to get to know the layers of their story. And it just sort of like very organically, I'd said to myself, like, this is a huge project undertaking to do. And I don't want to put that pressure on myself unless I'm doing it like, and really excited about it. Like, I don't want it to feel like a hassle. And so I sort of waited until I felt really excited about it. And then it just sort of like happened where I was talking to one friend and I like got her, like Allie, who's the first interview on that podcast. I met her that summer at a booth that she had, and her clothing brand at the time was like very much on its like first beginning stages. And now she's been like posted in like all kinds of magazines. Like her business is booming, and I highly recommend people check her out. And I got to be a person who interviewed her because I knew her a little bit earlier on. And there's all kinds of stories of tough stuff people have been through, but my whole sort of like what I wanted out of it was that they were all people who had these experiences, but then use that experience for whatever reason it is that we do to then like create this other thing. Because I think when you're in the middle of something, like when I was going through recovery, I kept watching these videos because like Netflix was not what it is now. So I was looking up these videos of like Red Bull athletes that had been through accidents and then they recovered. And obviously they're recovering on like Red Bull money. So that's not what I had, but I needed that. I needed to see like, okay, well, what have they done? If it wasn't their sport before, they're now really great at something else. And that's what these stories with these friends I had were, or like people I started to know were they had this experience and pivoted. And I just wanted to create this space for those stories to exist so that if you're a person and somehow you end up listening to one of them, then there's this whole library of different people where like, okay, here's this guy who was like set up to be a pro basketball player and then he had to get a metal rod put in his hip. And like, that's not my story, but that's something that could resonate for somebody else.
Right. And I think that's kind of how mine came about. Like, obviously being disabled, you see all the challenges. And at first I wanted to do like a vlog of my life, and then I kind of second guessed it. And then I figured, why don't share somebody else's story and anybody else's story that can relate. And this is episode 36 that we're doing now. And it's just, there's all different disabilities. Like I was telling you, Ben Finelli, another brain injury. It's like, they don't look disabled at all, but that's a disability. And any stomach issues, the fibromyalgia that the people walk around just fine and pain will just hit them. It's just cool to share the perspective. And how did you come up with the name?
I again have no idea. A lot of things in my life I just fly by the seat of my pants. I don't know. I think I was brainstorming, like I had this really long explanation because clearly I have a hard time like shortening things down, which is why I would never be a good journalist. I had this whole thing of like what I wanted my platform. Initially, I was going to make Embodied Alchemy like my whole brand. I mean, I've changed my mind on that now, but so I had all these words and stuff that I was trying to use to be like, how can I whittle this brand name down so that it really summarizes everything? And Embodied I picked because I feel like when you're going through transformation, like my whole thing is that I like to use my position to like give agency back to people, and that's like embodiment of what's going on. And then the alchemy, I think part of the reason why I chose that was because alchemy is like the transition or magic and changing, but also scientific, and because it was so many different platforms, and you're looking at people. I think I used what's another word that I use? Like I looked up a whole bunch of them, and I think alchemy ended up being a synonym, and I was like, embodied alchemy, okay. And I actually ended up like I was using that for a little while, and then somebody I knew from traveling, she's in Australia, also came up with that name too. And I was like, this is hilarious. Like, how did you come up with this name? And I was actually going to copyright it for Canada because nobody else has it here. And I was like, okay, if I want this to be my brand name, I have to do it. And then I decided that Dominique Cheshire is not a super common name, and I can actually get stuff with my name. And I'm like, I might as well just do that because that's who I am. And I'm still keeping Embodied Alchemy for the pod. And I think I'm going to use it for some projects coming up. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Interesting that you say synonym, because that's why I chose Cognizant Clay, because cognizant is a synonym for aware. And I figured, well, my name's Clayton, like the double C just kind of rings nice and it's easy to remember. So that's
I think it's really clever. Yeah, I think it sounds really good.
I use thesaurus.com. I'm not going to lie. I use it all the time. So
tried and true.
It works. And so what is the message behind your podcast? What like to summarize it into as short of an answer as you can, but don't worry if it's a long answer.
I think the message of it is hope, really, is what it's there for. It's there to remind us that even you're not alone. And if you're going through something really, really tough, like be in the thing that's making you tough. And if you want something there to act as a support tool, to know that other people have been through tough stuff and made it out, like that's a resource that I found really helpful to have. And so that's what I'm hoping it's doing for other people.
Yeah. And then well, like you say, like body positivity, self-love, like all that into one, which I think is important, especially nowadays with all the, social media really doesn't help our perspective or our self-image very much. I took a bit of a break from it a few years ago because it was like nothing's positive on here. Like you have to nitpick to find positivity, and that's kind of sad. But
or even the authenticity too. Like, and I will say that I've been guilty of this as well. Of like, you see the wording that other people are using, and people who have like those followers, and you think, okay, well, that's how I need to talk too. Like, I was just doing a bit of a sweep through of some stuff on my Instagram, and I was looking back. I was deleting all my highlight reels because I want to make new ones, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I think it's hilarious now, like looking at that. If I saw that, I would be like, nope. You know what I mean? And I think it's a good reminder that like your authentic voice is the right voice. It doesn't have to look like anybody else. Like if I want to talk about how much I love the Spice Girls because I really love the Spice Girls, like that's okay. And those are the people that are gonna want to be a part of my community anyway. So like the more authentic you are, the more likely you are to build that support network around you, which is like important.
Definitely. But it's hard to not judge yourself based on other people. And it's like,
for sure.
Well, honestly, just be yourself, because if it looks fake, no one's going to watch it. So totally. I figured like, I just did it one day. I was like, you know what? I'm doing this. Like, this is it. Like, no more being a wimp about it. Just do it. And I loved it from the first episode. So clearly it's the niche. And your podcast is definitely, I'm excited to be on that in a bit as well. So obviously, because of the disability awareness aspect, wanted to ask, like, and I know one of them because you've participated in the walk, but what are some charities that mean a lot to you or that you support, and just as an add-on, that helped you during your recovery?
I don't know if I had any charities so again, I was very fortunate that I could be at home, and I sort of felt like if my family has the financial resources even if it's a bit tough, like we all sort of felt like we can figure this out ourselves. Like any sort of extra support is designed for people that are like really, really, really need it. So, but I will say, and it's not a charity, but I think it's becoming more common. So with brain trauma stuff, they essentially say, and I've heard this not just in my case, I've heard this across the board because I've had a lot of conversations with people who've acquired brain trauma, is that they essentially say they give you 6 months. So you have your like first initial impact and they give you whatever prescription they tell you to do there. You have like a 6-month period that they give you. And they're like, basically wherever you are at the end of that 6 months is where you're going to be forever, which I think, to be honest, is a load of bullshit. Our brain is far more complex than that. And we live in a society that doesn't support rest. So if you were resting for 6 months in a dark room, then like maybe, but people have school, people have jobs. Like we don't have that government support in order to do that. If every single person, you know, and a lot of it, it's not just professional athletes, it's like kids in high school, you know, like I know a lot of people who suffered concussions, more than one, in high school sports, but like you can't take a break there. How do you get your scholarship for university if you do that, you know? And so when I acquired mine and I was having all of the like repercussions, I mean, that might not be the word someone else wants to use, but that's my word, of that experience. I was like, I am 22. I cannot live my life like this. I'm never going to be able to maintain relationships or friendships if I'm so erratic. I'm never going to be able to hold down a job if I'm so overwhelmed. And I had this like thing that was always floating in my eye. And so that was nice because it was like a physical, tangible thing that I could be like, I'm going to the eye doctor for this. And so I went to like 3 or 4 maybe different eye doctors in my memory. I feel like I went to a lot of different eye doctors and nobody could tell me anything. And I was at a physio person's clinic and I was talking about it. And she was like, there's this brain trauma clinic in Burlington and you should check them out. And that is where I started to actually get the support that I needed. And it's a very expensive program. I think you can get government support if you have, or I think you can get insurance support if you have insurance, but no one in my family at the time had any insurance coverage. So we had to pay for it all ourselves. And basically what you do is different programs, you have like a whole assessment and different programs are put together for you. And you go in once a week for however long. So I think I went in once a week for a year. And they just do different things because essentially when you've had an impact injury on your brain, like the pathways that have been created for neurosignals to fire don't exist anymore. And so in order to get things going again, especially like I had frontal lobe damage, you have to create new neural pathways. And if you don't give that education to your brain, then it can't do that. And so, I mean, it's not a charity. They also work with kids who are like diagnosed with behavioral problems. But again, like you look at the neurological research and information out there, and it's like, well, really, if we just sort of like stimulate the brain in this way, then it's going to get them going again. So I really recommend every person I've ever spoken to that has brain injury, I've always said to them, like, gratefully it's somewhere locally for us, but if you can find somewhere locally for you, like that was a huge game changer for me. So not a charity, but definitely something that I would recommend. And I like feel very passionately about it. And then the charities that I support don't have very much to do with accessibility. Now that I'm thinking about it, I like to support Inspire, which is an Indigenous organization, and they help support Indigenous students, I believe whatever age you are, and support them into university or into secondary education if they would like that path. So I like to support them. I have recently discovered this company called 12 Donations, which is a company that collects menstrual products and delivers them to places in Canada where they need more support for them, like especially in the Northern Territories. I think they work with Indigenous communities as well. Don't quote me on that. I might be wrong about that, but they go into areas of Toronto in Canada that need more support. So I like supporting them. Lots of like local people, if I can do that too. So yeah, accessibility is something that I'm trying to incorporate. Sorry, I'm on a roll. It's something I'm trying to incorporate more into like my day-to-day functioning and like the places that I work. So like one of the places I teach at right now, it's a new studio. So when we were chatting about like their development of stuff over the next couple of years, I was like, well, we have to make sure we have accessibility entrance at the door, which is like kind of a nightmare. Like I was told it was a really simple process, but apparently City of Burlington is making it not an easy process, but I'm like, we need to make it accessible. So like making sure there's accessibility at the doors, making sure there's accessibility at the bathroom, sure we're all educated in accessibility in our languaging. And that's what I'm trying to do, like on a day-to-day basis, to support.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because not enough businesses are accessible. Like it's crazy how many still aren't. Like it's 2020, there's like 30% of the world is affected by a disability. Like that's 1 in 3 people almost. So it's like,
yeah,
come on, like figure it out. And well, the other one I was going to say is Muscular Dystrophy Canada, because you've participated in the walk ever since it started. You, Jeff, and Katerina are the OG friends that participate in it. So there's always that.
I have missed the past. Well, obviously it was canceled this year, so COVID,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
You went 2 years ago.
I went 2 years ago because I was away. I kept like having stuff come up in June. Like I think I was in England last year because I saw Spice Girls, and then I was in Guatemala the year before that. And I'm like, Fork, I keep having to like miss this, and it's the best. It's like it's the one time a year, sometimes more, but like usually the one time a year we all know we're gonna be seeing each other.
Exactly, and life's so busy now. It's like nobody ever has time anymore. It's nothing ever stops anymore. It's quite
the irony of that statement, as the world has been stopped for like the whole year, but it's not like it's stopped so we can like all hang out. It's just stopped.
It's true, and I haven't had many people over. Like I said, I'm high risk, so
yeah,
I haven't seen very many people. There's like 2 friends in my bubble, because a lot of my friends work in Toronto, and that's the hot spot right now. So it's all crazy. And so just to wrap up, I always ask this because someone may be watching that's going through whatever the guest is going through. And so what advice would you give to someone who has been in an accident that caused a traumatic brain injury or PTSD?
I think the first thing, and again, this is not like professional advice, this is just from my experience, it would be to give yourself like 100% grace and then add $1 billion to that. Like never, there's going to be so much that feels like it's against you, and don't suppress your feelings. Like if you're feeling angry, be angry. If you're feeling sad, be sad. And also the less that we can, I don't want to say less, if we can feel those things and let them out and like feel like that's what's happening, like we're letting it out, and then just keep going. And even if it's like a tiny baby crawl in the direction of up or out or whatever, however you want to imagine it, like just do it, like one little thing. And I had an amazing therapist through, like, I really believe in therapy, and I was going a couple of times a week at the beginning because my PTSD was so bad, and then I could slowly start to bring it down. But something that she said to me very early on was give one thing in every day that gives you purpose. And at first I was like, well, that's dumb because I can't do anything. And so it really had to change my lens on what being purposeful meant, which is a very interesting practice that I think anybody should do. You know, like, where are you getting your sense of purpose from and your like feelings about yourself from? But yeah, so even if your sense of purpose is like changing your shirt or brushing your hair or brushing your teeth, like that can be a huge task, especially if it's like, I'm in this room and the washroom's over there and somehow I have to get there. You know what I mean? Like that can still be a huge task. So I think that's what I would say. And like, just keep going. Like one little baby crawl in front of the other.
Definitely. And then my one buddy, David, he's got fibromyalgia, and he says, stay in the fight. That's his motto for his podcast. And it's like, that is so true. It's so simple, but just keep going, because like you say, even if you're disabled and it's making a drink for yourself, you're reaching something on a shelf, like that is progress, and that's all that matters. Well, that's about all I have, Dom. Thanks again for being a guest. I really enjoyed it, and
thank you.
We will do yours soon. I've just got to do a few things, and then we'll rock it for sure.
We will rock it. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you so much for all the like incredible work. I mean, I know that you're going to be on my podcast, but even still, like the incredible work you've done. You've spoken to amazing people, and like you've said yes, and you're doing it, and like unbelievable. So also thank you like buckets full for creating this project and loving it and doing it and continuing with it.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll see you soon.
Yes. Bye.
All right. Bye.